Welcome, welcome to First Wednesday at the Brooks Memorial Library. We're back and we're live. Doesn't that feel great? After 2 years, we're welcoming the Vermont Humanities Council back into the library for a live lecture presentation, and we are so lucky tonight. We welcome two of our treasured local poets, Shanta Lee Gander and Diana Whitney, who both have new books, new best-selling books out, and we are so pleased that we can bring them into the library and we can all enjoy their poetry in person. And we also have a special guest, Christal Brown, who is a dancer and a professor from Middlebury College, and she will be presenting her work as well. We are so happy to be debuting our in-person programs with the Poetics of Girlhood and Womanhood in America with Diana Whitney, Shanta Lee Gander, and Christal Brown. First, I need to thank First Wednesday statewide sponsors, the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The partner for tonight's talk is Middlebury College and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Tonight's talk is underwritten by the Anne Komeyer Fund for Women in the Humanities. And of course, we want to thank your friends and mine, the Friends of Brooks Memorial Library, for underwriting all of the First Wednesday's talk here in Brattleboro this season. You may notice some QR codes scattered around the room. If you could scan those with your phone, they will automatically generate a feedback form for you tomorrow morning, so you can let Vermont Humanities Council know how much you appreciate this program. And it is a privilege and a pleasure for me to introduce our speakers this evening. Many of them you will know. Diana Whitney writes across the genres with a focus on feminism, motherhood, and sexuality. Her first book, Wanting It, became an indie bestseller and won the Rubery Book Award in Poetry. She was the longtime poetry critic for the San Francisco Chronicle, where she featured women poets and LGBTQ+ voices in her column. Her essays, op-eds, and book reviews have appeared in the New York Times. I've read some there. The Washington Post, the Kenyon Review, Glamour, and many more. Her anthology, You Don't Have to Be Everything, Poems for Girls Becoming Themselves, was released by Workman Publishing to critical acclaim, won the 2022 Claudia Lewis Award for the Best Poetry Book of the Year, and became a YA bestseller. Woo-hoo. Yeah. Shanta Lee Gander is an artist who works in different mediums as a photographer, writer across genres, and is a public intellectual whose work has been widely featured. She is the author of GHETTOCLAUSTROPHOBIA, Dreaming of Mama While Trying to Speak in Woke Tongues, the winner of the 2020 Diode Press Full-Length Book Award with an honorable mention from the Sheila Margaret Moten Award, and reviews featured in the Poetry Foundation's Harriet Books, 7 Days, and Kenyon Review, and the Adroit Journal. Her forthcoming collection, Black Metamorphoses, is what Shanta Lee describes as a 2,000-plus-year-old phone line open to Ovid, as well as an interrogation of the Greek mythos while creating her own new language in this work. Black Metamorphoses is an illustrated poetry collection that has been longlisted for the 2021 Idaho Poetry Prize, shortlisted for the 2021 Coles Poetry Book Prize, and named as a finalist in the 2021 Hudson Prize. And as if that weren't enough, Christal Brown is the founder of In Spirit, Project Becoming, the creator of the Liquid Strength Training Module for Dance, an associate professor of dance and director of the Anti-Racist Task Force at Middlebury College, and the CVO of Steps and Stages LLC. Brown is a native of Kingston, North Carolina, where she remembers accompanying her mother to NAACP meetings and performing at Black Caucus rallies. This early exposure to social responsibility innately produced a strong desire in Brown to put her gifts to work for the greater good. Brown earned her BFA in dance and minor in business from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and her MFA in new media art and technology from Long Island University. Brown's evolution combines her creativity, educational gifts, and love for people into a dynamic coaching, facilitation, and consulting practice designed to create vision and sustain change. And more information on all three of our speakers can be found on their websites, and we at the library can help you find those websites. So please join me in welcoming Diana, Shanta, and Christal to the Brooks Memorial.
I'm so honored to be in this good company. So I'm going to start just a little bit, tiny bit, with the backstory of why this panel. So this panel was really born out of thinking about my book, GhettoClaustrophobia, Dreaming of Mama While Trying to Speak Woman in Both Tongues. Full mouthful, and thinking about some of the bigger themes in that book, coming of age, becoming, walking the corridor between girlhood to womanhood. And as I thought about the bigger themes, I also thought about some of the other books and some of the other conversations that are happening and thinking about girlhood, womanhood in America, individual stories. So these are just a few examples of some of the exploration and the deeper look, and actually there's a whole there's been an academic movement, I think since the 90s, looking at girlhood and thinking about girlhood. And so what was really fascinating to me, also the Black scholars celebrated their 50th anniversary, I would say maybe a year and a half ago. And so they did this whole issue about Black girlhood globally as well. So the ways of really looking at the experiences, and not just individual experiences, connective experiences, and had me thinking about different questions like, what is girlhood and womanhood across different modes? What does it sound like in verse? What does it feel like in the body through dance? How is the self manifested through various lived experiences? Also, what do we mean by that term? Those terms that are kind of feel like they may be trapped in the binary of girlhood and womanhood. And so, Diana and Christal, I'm so honored that you've joined me and that you said yes to this. And I'm very curious about what you all, like when you think about your concepts and this concept of girlhood, womanhood, your work, the route, the pathway to becoming. I'm so curious as to how it manifested for you. So we're going to first start with Diana. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Shanta and Christal, and I'm just so excited to be here with all of you. My book is about a year old right now, and I think this is the second or third time that in that year that I've actually presented it in person. So it's wonderful, and I'll try not to get verklempt either. So that question, what does it feel like in the body? That is maybe where I want to start. Because I feel like poetry does, more so maybe than other forms of writing, really inhabit us in our bodies. And I'm hoping to read just maybe a couple of my favorite poems from this book. Although I say favorite, there's 68 poems in the book. And I think I have different favorite ones at different times. I wanted to collect the voices I wished that I'd heard when I was a teen. And I always say that I worked on this book for about 2 years, but really I've been working on it since I was 13. And now I have 2 daughters who are going through did you call it the corridor between girlhood and womanhood? And so I'm sort of reliving intensely what it means to be an adolescent girl, which I have to say is, if possible, is harder now than it was when I was going through that crucible in the 80s and 90s. I really struggled with depression and self-loathing and self-harming. I was also in the closet as a queer person. My very first relationship was with another girl. That was a huge, shameful secret that I had to keep hidden until I was 20. So when I embarked upon the project for this book, it was an opportunity to find voices in poetry that spoke to unwriting and unlearning shame. And I think that storytelling and poetry as a form of storytelling is a profound tool to unwrite shame. And shame does live in the body. And there's a lot of shame in having a female body. Or I guess this is also where I'm going to need to be careful around terms of gender, because something that was really important to me as I embarked on this was the original title for the book was Poems for Girls Becoming Women. That was when I had to I wrote like a 30-page book proposal in order to get the book deal. That was the subtitle that the editors and everybody wanted. And then as I was doing this work, and I really wanted to embrace non-binary poets and trans voices as well, and that awareness that not all girls do become women. And so that Poems for Girls Becoming Themselves, that there are many forms of becoming, that was really important to me. So I divided the book into chapters according to emotion, which became easy, or just a helpful organizing principle. And the first poem in the book is by Stephanie Burt, who's a trans poet, a Harvard professor, absolutely brilliant. She's come actually here to the Brattleboro Literary Festival, presented her work at the Latches. Can only imagine what it would be like to take a college class with her. But the first poem is called Final Exam Stephanie, and it's about reimagining her own girlhood, what it would have been like. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long, but you'll see that very first line. Please turn in or leave behind any scratch materials. You have now agreed to follow all the rules. Good girls will be notified sooner. Next year you are going. You have to look forward to until. I was lucky enough to do an event with Stephanie where she read this poem, and I encourage you to read the whole thing, but it's really about self-discovery, and also at the end getting to name herself. So let me keep going. Second chapter, Loneliness, which is an all too familiar feeling for those who are teens. But also, as I was working on this book and during the pandemic, I realized that was just a very basic human experience. But something that I've learned about Generation Z, which is who this readership was and who my kids are, is they're actually called the loneliest generation. I didn't know that. I read an article, and that they are so immersed in their screens, they're digital natives, and then the past 2 years of isolation. So these poems, so the thing about poetry is that it can be humorous, it can be witty, it can be deeply vulnerable. And Franny Choi, who's a wonderful queer poet, this poem, Solitude, is also one of those poems that is really felt in the body. And I love the tone of the first line. I hope no one comes to my party, I said out loud and meant it. And I am going to read a couple of poems, but I want to keep going. So one of the things you'll notice is that the book is illustrated, and we worked with 3 illustrators. And that was an interesting process. Initially, the editorial team and design team at Workman, they chose one. I was giving feedback, and I kind of had a vision, and I was finding these illustrators that I was looking for. They chose one who was a British woman, wonderful illustrator, but she was another middle-aged white woman like me. And I said, no, that's not acceptable. And we have to, if this is really going to be, because they wanted to, promote this book as a diverse anthology, and certainly the representation of the poets are, but it was very important that it be that for the illustrators as well. So then they went back to the drawing board and they included 2 other illustrators, and I love how they brought the poems to life. And that illustration is one of my favorites in the attitude chapter. Sorry, I'm having trouble. So Amanda Gorman, I got really lucky. I've been following Amanda Gorman's life and career for a few years, but it was amazing to have her become the inaugural poet in 2 months before my book came out. And you can see the poem that I chose of hers is a shaped poem, Black Daughter's Pointillism. So the attitude chapter is like that bit of sass, that confidence in oneself that, sometimes as a parent can be really frustrating if you're getting that attitude, but I really want to, and we have Maya Angelou in Phenomenal Woman in the attitude chapter as well, and Lucille Clifton, who's one of my favorite poets ever. I actually just want to say one thing because I just remembered Lucille Clifton. My book is actually now on a banned books list. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I was talking about shame, and the first feeling that I had when I got the email that a group of concerned parents in Northeast Arkansas were trying to ban it from their local libraries, I felt ashamed. That was my first reaction. And then I got angry, and then I felt, actually, I'm in really good company. This is a badge of honor. But I went to see what what these parents were upset about, and they were upset about Lucille Clifton's poem, Homage to My Hips. They were upset about poems about blackness. They were upset about any mention of queerness and any mention of sexual violence. I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and I deliberately did not avoid poems that talked about that subject in this book. And there are parents who don't want to have their daughters or their young people reading that. And I was reading their comments. They were calling it obscenity and inappropriate. And the reality is, this is really, really hard to just throw in a statistic, but 1 in 4 girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18. And, that's sobering. And actually, going back to this question of shame and also mental health, which was, something that I've struggled with my whole life. Today's teens have higher levels of anxiety than any previous generation, and by mid-adolescence, teen girls are twice as likely to develop mood disorders as boys are, and to wrestle with depression. So this was my audience. These are the ones that I wanted to present, these poems of empowerment, but also acknowledging that the sadness and the loneliness and other emotions that we don't necessarily consider positive, like rage, are there. And I love that picture. I've definitely felt like that when I was a teenager. I still do. In the angry poems, they're tough poems. This is a little short one here just because it fit on the slide, but there's a poem in here called The Period Poem by a spoken word poet named Dominique Christina. I don't know if anyone knows her. Yeah.
I've used that poem in one of my presentations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, it's a fabulous poem. It went viral, millions of people saw it, and I got the permission to use it in here. There's a lot of curses in here. It's just an amazing poem. And I was, last year, I was lucky enough to do poetry and creative writing workshops with the teen girls who were counselors at the Green Mountain Camp. And I presented the book, and they were very quiet, and then I started reading a couple poems. I was like, all right, let's do the poem from the Rage chapter. Like, maybe, do you think you guys can handle some swear words? Do the period poem, and I read the period poem out loud. Here, I'll read you guys the very first line. Dude on Twitter said, I was having sex with my girlfriend when she started her period. I dumped that bitch immediately. Dear nameless dummy on Twitter, you're the reason my daughter cried funeral tears when she started her period. The sudden grief all young girls feel after the matriculation from childhood and the induction into a reality that they'll have to negotiate people like you and your disdain for what a woman's body can do. And it keeps going for like 4 pages, and it just keeps getting more and more fierce and powerful. And by the end, they were like cheering out loud, and like, it was really amazing. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I want to make sure that I get through and read. So we have Longing. Cameron Awkward-Rich is a trans poet he's a, this is like another for my realization that that I couldn't have that initial title, Girls Becoming Women, Girls Becoming Themselves. And you know what, maybe I'll read Cameron's poem. That might be a good place to finish, because it's such a beautiful poem, and it really addresses the pain of the world. So sometimes longing isn't just for a beloved or for a relationship. It can be longing for the world to be different, longing for justice. So meditations in an emergency. I wake up and it breaks my heart. I draw the blinds and the thrill of rain breaks my heart. I go outside, I ride the train, walk among the buildings, men in Monday suits. The flight of doves, the city of tents beneath the underpass, the huddled mass, old women hawking roses, and children, all of them, break my heart. There's a dream I have in which I love the world. I run from end to end like fingers through her hair. There are no borders, only wind. Like you, I was born. Like you, I was raised in the institution of dreaming. Hand on my heart, hand on my stupid heart. This is another poem of longing. Rachel Wiley, queer poet, writes a lot about body positivity. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the clicker. Shame. Shame. I wanted to get to, I know I'm almost done.
Yeah, that's right. Did you?
I just wanted to show you all Natalie Diaz, but we can just go right through there. Yeah, so Natalie Diaz won the Pulitzer Prize. If you don't know her, highly recommend, just the most beautiful poems. And I chose Why I Hate Raisins, in terms of how shame is really manifested in the body. I won't read it. Maybe we could get a chance to read it later. And if you want to just click through the end, and then we can have Christal. So short. Sadness, the second to last chapter. What to say to a friend who wants to give up. All of us have had a friend that we've needed to say, to console. And then the final chapter, Belonging. Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poems ever. And then the last poem in the book is Joy Harjo, our U.S. Poet Laureate. Really wanted to end on hope and that idea that you can have all of these messy emotions. You can have darkness, you can be angry, you can be ashamed, you can want to give up, and then you can be full of desire. And then you also belong. You belong to the world and to your community and to yourself.
Thank you. Hey everybody, I'm Christal Brown. Most people just say my whole name. I was only 3 syllables. I don't have a manuscript for you, right? But next year. Little known fact, I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and So if you want to know what that's like, you can subscribe to my daily email list. I write an email every day to people who want to just know what I'm thinking about. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with this little piece called I'm Fine. Because one of the things about language is we actually don't use it for what it's meant for. One of my favorite poets, Nikki Giovanni, says that people try to speak English instead of trying to speak through it. And so what we're going to do today is just watch kind of how I like to speak through language. And then we'll talk a little bit about the rest of the work. Enjoy. Oh, God, thank you. I'm so glad you came. I know this is silly, okay, but I really just need you to help me with this. I mean, people keep asking me this, and it seems simple, but I'm not answering it right. So, just quiz me here. Go with me. Let's see. Ask me how I am. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, ask me now. Ask me how I am.
How are you?
I'm fine! Oh, that's aggressive. Sounds like I'm hiding something. Okay, I don't want them to think I'm hiding anything. Okay, ask me again. Just ask me how I am.
How are you?
I'm fine! Prozac. No, I don't think I'm okay. Okay. Just let me think about it. Give me one more shot. Just ask me how I am.
How are you?
I'm fine. That's better? Yeah. I mean, or not? Little tacky. You look a little. I'm not fine. I'm not fine. I mean, by all measures and worldly affectations, I'm fine. By all, demeanor, I'm fine. I mean, when anyone asks, I say I'm fine. I mean, after the baby, I'm fine. After the breakup, I'm fine. After going to God, I'm fine. And after the hair, I'm fine. No, seriously, it's not cancer, I'm fine. I mean, after the weight loss, I'm fine. What woman in her right mind is going to complain about being thinner? Me? I mean, I'm fine. They keep asking me this. They just want to know. It's like they're on a fishing expedition or something, like casting their net, wanting to know if they're going to be the one to catch me on the day when my eyes are welled up, my lips are pursed, and there's that lump in my throat that really wants to tell them how the heck I really am. When all that spills out, they'll catch it and run and tell the next person, like they've solved the riddle of the Sphinx. But I am fine. Trust me on this. I'm fine. I mean, don't we all hit a little rough patch? Yeah? Take a little trip to the dark side? Determine how long we're going to linger in the unrest? But I have started to chart my way down the road to recover me. And I've stayed my last night at the Lost My Way Motel. I've paid my bill. I've cleared my pay-per-view count. I have collected a plethora of soaps and shampoos. And I've had my last continental breakfast with Jessica. Housekeeper / front door clerk / confidant. And I mean, after all this, I feel like I'm stronger, I'm stronger. I'm humble. I'm vulnerable. Sometimes I'm a little overwhelmed. God knows I'm in need of a new pair of jeans. But I'm fine. I mean, seriously, I'm fine. I'm working through it, I'm a little more cautious than I used to be, but, can't let everything in all the time. I should probably lock the car more often. I'm determined, that is for sure. I'm determined to make my past and my future into something fabulous. I am determined to refurbish my present with a couple coats of joy, a few new perspectives, and a badge on the front door that says perseverance. I am forgiving, I'm faithful, I'm free, and in my opinion, ain't I fun? So that piece is 10 years old, and I know because my son was 1 when the piece came out. And if you know anything about dance, or maybe you don't, but it's not a prerequisite here, when you have a baby and your body is the vehicle for everything that you do, most people think your career is over, right? And so this piece was made a year after I had given birth to a son, and there were women lined up around the corner to take my spot, not only in that dance company, but in the field in general, right? And so I was really feeling at a loss of identity. I was feeling at a loss of, oh, I can take this off, right, sir? I was feeling at a loss of identity. I was feeling at a loss of what my body had been for and the worthiness that I now had to offer the world, right? But I'm from the South, and Southern women just say, oh, I'm fine, baby. It's fine. You know, I'm fine, right? So I'm enculturated to always be fine. In the world, looking like this, in this physique, black women are supposed to be fine and strong. And so there was really no place in here where anyone knew the truth. Even during this time, I was on the cover of a magazine called Matter Mia, which is about mothering, right? And at the time, I was a welfare mother in New York. I was living in an 800 square foot bedroom apartment, and my son and I were living in the living room, which was my bedroom, his bedroom, and my office, and we were renting out the bedroom in the back to make ends meet. When the photographer came, there was so much stuff in the apartment that we had to go take the pictures for the front of this magazine at a park down the street. And so when we think about this idea of like girlhood to womanhood, it is less about what we look like and what our age is, but what we've been through. Right? Our stripes are about the wars that we fight inside and outside. Maybe you've read the book, You Are the Mountain, right? But it really just talks about how the enemy is always you, and the obstacle on the outside has nothing to do with how hard you fight. And when we think about this trajectory, the reason that I founded things like Project Becoming is because when I was going through this, I was walking down the streets of the Bronx, and I would see young women out and about at noon. Because in New York City, you can like just get out of school when you don't have any more classes. Mind-blowing to me. So I grew up in North Carolina, and I was sometimes out of school at noon, but it wasn't because they let me out. And I was doing some things that I didn't have any business doing. At least we didn't want my mother to find out about it, right? And so I could only imagine what I was doing in a small town in eastern North Carolina and what these young women could do with an unlimited Metro card in New York City. And so we founded Project Becoming because I wanted them to have a place to come and actually ask questions that would get answered. Not that people would push under the rug with colloquialisms and culture and say, don't worry about it, you'll figure it out sooner or later. Because what that does to intelligent young people, women, men, whatever gender they choose, is to lead them on a pathway to figure it out. And experimentation without experience always leads to extra, right? Just a lot of extra. And coming back from that extra is each part of your book, right? It's the joy, it's the sadness, it's the anger, it's all of the emotions that we then have to make sense of and call that adulting. So, you know from my bio that I am a professor, and I am constantly in conversation with the next generation, to the point where now I've been in academia so long that I understand the reciprocal flow of their trauma. Right? And so I point things out to them ahead of time. They're like, no, it's not going to be like that. And 2 weeks later, Miss Christal, I can't even believe you. And I'm like, yeah, I told you that was going to happen. Right? And what is interesting to me is that they always want to know how I know so that they can then preemptively talk to themselves or talk themselves out of it. Right? Because not only are we in a pandemic, we're in an infodemic. And this generation is not only lonely, but they have so much information that they're overwhelmed. Right? And so I have a mentor who says inspiration without action is merely entertainment. But in this time, I like to go a step further and say information without instruction leads to insecurity. And that's really the traumatic part of going from girlhood to womanhood. Shanta Lee Gander, ladies and gentlemen.
Follow the both of you, like that's not fair. So we'll put this on. So, for me, the corridor that I talked about, the corridor from girlhood to womanhood, was about thinking about the many gazes. Through which gazes was I going to navigate my personhood and becoming? Was I going to go through the Christian gaze, which, family, lucky me, both sides of my family, one ancestor founded a bunch of churches, so there was that. The gaze of the one who is going to carry the racial group on my back, an inheritance from way long before I was born. So, and thinking about, who was I going to be, how was I going to be, the book and exploring these questions were surprising to me in many ways. There's some quotes on these slides from my book, adapting to their custom, their language, my body as wonderland, as what happens to me while I've gone missing, me as their minotaur, and exotic of their imagining. This book actually was the first time I had explored these specific questions of my body and my girlhood on page and verse. I've done it through prose and I've done it through storytelling, but I've not done it quite. It was almost like, no, my poetry is for something else and for other things, not for talking about where I grew up, not for talking about, 280 Collins Street. And so I'm thankful actually to these images. For some, these images might look like something else. For me, I was thankful, to seeing, it was another kind of gaze of how, the media gaze, some of and much of that I'm not sorry for, in terms of showing me or maybe reflecting things back to myself as possibility in some ways. And of course, really hard questions like, is it sexual confidence, or is it sexual self-exploitation? Is it reclamation, or playing to the stereotype of historical context of the Black female body? And I can't read my slide without. The children of lack and plenty have nothing on me, and that's from my poem, Trying to Speak Woman. So for me, it was about asking myself, my life experience, my lived experience was about asking myself, how was my body, my sensuality, my sexuality going to come along in the world? How would I define it? Because I always make the joke that my mother, I was kind of like a sexual apprentice to her in the sense that I would see her sway her hips. I would see her be very shameless. She was married to my father was at work, and the world kind of, unapologetic about using womanly wiles. So I learned from her, and then I had to navigate, okay, how to not be like that, and how to walk in between being like that, and how to be maybe unapologetic about being like that or not be like that. But then there are also other things too. There were instances and moments of learning how to take my body back, how to take myself back, especially not just in the world, but in the home. And how to not be defined by others. So it was very much a dance between the seen and unseen. And it's funny because even though we use the language of erasure, we could say, oh, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Sound of Music. These are all my favorite movies, by the way. And I'm unapologetic about it. We use the language of erasure. That is a very real thing, right? Representation, lack of representation, yes. But also, I saw these as opportunities. I looked at these through lenses, like, you could not tell me I wasn't Julie Andrews on those mountains. You could, minus running from the Nazis, minus that part, and hightailing it out of there, World War II, minus that part when I was younger. But you couldn't tell me, if there was something about the romance of it that I just engaged with that gave me a window to possibility. And speaking of shame, there is, I hid my period for 2 years when it started. I did not tell my mother. I knew that was not a safe woman to trust with my body, my becoming. So I kind of held it as a secret, and like 1 month, came and went, and then it came and went again for 2 years. And then I staged the call at middle school because I was like, well, I don't want this to happen at home. So I'm gonna, I knew what to do to take care of it, but I wasn't interested in having her. She was not going to be my proper usher. And so I saw the unseen and the seen kind of as a source of power. Kind of as a source of power. And also just thinking about the idea of black girl magic, being about reshaping the world within my own imagining to see myself. So this image, actually, true story, it stuck with me for many years. It is a page, The Princess and the Pea, I believe this is Princess and the Pea. I remember it from a childhood book for years. Never went looking for the book until finally I was like, I'm gonna see if I imagined that image because it stuck with me. Hence the reason why I like my beds really high. I do like them high. They have to be piled high with mattresses and such. And so it stuck with me. And again, I didn't see other brown girls across the pages, but you couldn't tell me that that couldn't be my life too. There's no way you were gonna tell me that that wasn't my life. And so what does it mean to be self-making? What does it look like in some of what you started talking about, Christal, in the lens of imagination? For me, the self-making is sometimes through my photography. So these are images from Dark Goddess, where I asked individuals who, the seeking out of the sacred feminine, what was that looking like? What would they feel like? World building with them to reimagine who or how they wanted to be. Kind of in the way of painting and making the world as I want it to be. Like if I were, I have many patron saint names for myself, and I'm not even Catholic, but I would like I guess I would often say I'd want to be the patron saint of people just being as they are, unapologetic. And with that, I'll end and maybe open with questions. Thank you. Okay, so why does this thing always sound... Can everybody hear me? I'm going to just project. Are there questions? We would love to open up to questions, or maybe...
We also have the prompt.
Yeah, there's a prompt too. So the prompt that we had for people that we want to ask about, what were the people, places, or things that encouraged you in your becoming? Or what encouraged you in being your most self? What were some of the breadcrumbs?
Like you're asking us?
Yeah!
Maybe you
Yes.
just want to reflect.
Yeah, reflect. You could think about it, or you could speak it. Just think about what were some of the breadcrumbs. I've decided the witch's house in Hansel and Gretel is not the witch's house. That's the wise woman's house who was painted as the witch. And then she teaches you how, what were some of the breadcrumbs that led you to, your becoming yourself? What does that look like?
So, the pandemic was really transformative, I think, for me, and I relate to a lot of what Diana was talking about with all the chapters and the emotions and all those things that you grapple with growing up, and going into the pandemic, I finally was able to afford mental health, which was really challenging in my previous life because I didn't have the right health insurance and ended up just owing a bunch of money and not being able to finish. But yeah, it was funny because I ended up sort of self-diagnosing, and in doing that, realized that a lot of what I was projecting onto people was actually something in myself. And I was actually causing like the people around me a lot of pain. It wasn't the other way around, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, of course I'm not like, you know, I haven't like had my trials and tribulations with others, but I realized that a lot of what I was carrying was like my own baggage. And so during the pandemic, I started like finding a lot of, well, first of all, there was like, in 2020, there was obviously like the huge challenge in America dealing with, you know, the rise of Black Lives Matter and how difficult that was like for people to actually process. And there was a lot of, I feel like we're like a more divided country in a lot of ways, but also a more unified country in a lot of ways because of like that sort of upheaval of being like, wow, this is all our demons. Let's like pull them out and look at them and talk about them, right? And a lot of the challenge, I think, is now for people, is including myself, is to be able to listen to others and not assume that you know what they're thinking, right? So yeah, I think, you know, I follow you, Shanta, and I just love like your musings and the way that you explore art, and it's been really transformative for me to like see people, you know, challenge ideas. Like I've learned that I I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. Like I love when people aren't afraid to be uncomfortable or like to create an uncomfortable situation, because I think those uncomfortable situations are like imperative.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I throw that to Evie? Have your hand up?
Oh, how did you catch that? Oh. Is this?
Yeah.
It is on, okay. So this question isn't really formulated. But as someone who has always very strongly identified as a woman, as a girl, as a woman, I am really struggling with how to, and as also someone who you know, parented, who is still parenting a girl and a boy who are non-binary. I'm struggling about how to be inclusive. It's not like I don't want to be inclusive. I'm struggling how to be both woman proud and inclusive, and I'm wondering how each of you is navigating that.
I'll just jump in real quick. So I have an 11-year-old boy. So this is an interesting day for me because earlier today I was on a podcast that was talking about men and malehood and how am I raising this guy to be you know, a good dude in the world, right, basically. And you should know just a little bit of history is that when I founded my dance company, it was all women. And when my son was born a year later and I was going to choreograph the last piece ever, a piece about Muhammad Ali, my whole company turned into men. And I thought to myself, wow, having a son really shines light on a lot of things you weren't thinking about before. And so all of that just kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things about, because up until that point I was like, I had an all-female company, I do community engagement for young women, and then I had this son who was just as insecure, just as sad, just as emotional, just as all these things that we had been attributing to this female configuration and how we dictate personality and need and all of these things. And so I really started to understand that the construct of identity, which is really what most of my work is about, was being shaped in front of me. And it was really the most authentic experiment through my artistry that I could ever pay attention to. It was way beyond a choreography lesson, way beyond any degree, way beyond any performance or theater. I was watching the thing that I had been trying to make my entire life come to fruition, right? And so all of my work, whether it's written, performed, teaching, whatever, is about identity and transformation. And so what I think, Evie, is that my identity continues to unfurl, the more I know about him, the world, and myself. But again, right, the mountain is me. I can fight against trying to differentiate myself, or I can fight to just become more of myself. And the more I fight to become more of who I really am, then the more the reflection that you're talking about, that you kind of found yourself in relationship to other people and you couldn't navigate where the conflict was beginning or ending. But the more that I become fully myself, the more I can be an authentic reflection back. And that's where the real dialogue starts. That's where the appreciation starts. That's where the transformation begins.
Do you want to go or should I?
Yeah, why don't you jump in and
Yeah.
have some thoughts?
It's a really good question. I love that answer. And I think these ideas around gender, they are more challenging for those of us like in the older generation. It's really amazing, you know, when I was watching the way my kids just fluidly incorporate they, them pronouns. They don't stumble over it.
It's not grammatically incorrect.
Right.
We had to get over that first.
We have to get over these,
That's so
the
true.
way the grammar was sort of,
Yeah.
was it,
Yeah.
you know, kind of indoctrinated us. And things being on a spectrum of, you know, gender identity, sexuality. Let's say I'm the mom of at least one queer kid, you know, we don't even talk about identity. I don't even ask that. And so I do feel like it is a delicate dance around, like you said, like being proud of being woman, you know, that sort of like girl power and all of that, and then also being very open. I just try to check myself in my preconceptions and being like really open-minded to all different forms of expression. And I think what does help me is like seeing role models like in the media even, whether they're writers or celebrities or performers who are talking honestly about their, you know, that non-binary. There's someone I'm following on Instagram right now. Their name is Cameron Esposito, and every day I'm learning. And I think it involves being really humble about like how much I just don't know. And also not like not being so afraid to make a mistake, right? Like if you say the wrong pronoun, oh, I'm sorry, you know, and then but not cowering in shame about getting it wrong. Because it does feel new. You know, I mean, it really is generational because I saw two of my best friends from college for the first time in a long time last summer, and one of them was this great activist who was out there protesting, you know, all the terrible things that were happening in the 90s. I'm trying to remember. I would think it was like our college investing in apartheid. And he was like always the guy who was wearing skirts and had like long hair and everything. And I said, if it had been available to you to like use they, them pronouns and like think about yourself as non-binary, like would you have done that? And he said, absolutely. If I had had that option to like opt out of like full-on masculinity and all of those expectations, which is maybe what you were talking about when all of a sudden there's, you know, maleness and all the weight that comes with that, but really, I mean, like all the range of emotions that we're talking about, you know, boys experience that too. So I don't need to tell you that, mother of a son and a daughter, but I'll pass it to Shanta.
I have kind of a different take. I'm not a mother, even though I did mother my autistic brother with two parents in a home. I did raise a kid, that wasn't really. So there's one level that I've thought of in the past through all my relationships, through the lens of intimate relationships and how that my femaleness or womanness or girlness was defined. And then I placed myself in this historical sense of the masculinization of the black and brown body. And I like yank it back, you know, because like I have a right to be unapologetically woman and female for myself, for how I want to define that. And then I also also think about another level of how to go beyond all those things and all those boxes. And even like beyond of this, I've been throwing around the term man boots, because I often feel like I'm wearing man boots to do my own schlepping and things. And I'm not interested in that. I don't want that. Like, I've done that all my life. And so like, I know you're laughing, I said man boots. And then I'm like, but I have stylish man boots and like gender bend with it and take some pride with it. But so there's a way in which I've danced around in these different iterations and thinking, going back to how do I see myself unapologetically as myself. And also, I'll just end with thinking of Johari's window, where there's a way that through all of our lives, it's just a square from the 1950s, 60s. It was started or thought of by two psychologists in the self-help movement. And so there's one quadrant where you know yourself, you know things about yourself others do not know about you. There's a quadrant where there are things about yourself that you do not know but others know. And then there's the quadrant that you don't know and everybody else doesn't know. And then there's the quadrant where you know and everybody else knows. I feel like we spend our whole lives, depending on situations, dancing around or going around those things, and kind of similar to what you were saying, like I feel like it's forever unzipping, even in terms of, I ride a motorcycle, and I will ride my motorcycle in pearls, like no one will tell me that I can't do that. And so like I get to define those things for myself, and also the next level of what is like how people are defining themselves in this moment, I'm learning from the students that I'm teaching at the Whitney School, and also other people in my life who are just teaching me how they're self-defining. I think it's a beautiful moment. Thank you for that. Any other questions or thoughts?
Can I ask you a question to dig a little deeper on that?
Sure, and then
Sorry,
you
you
go
go first.
You want to ping pong? And then we'll come back.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is a little off the course, but when you asked the question what awoke you or what evoked within you the feminine, I grew up in an ideal situation, a house in the country, my father out of World War II, a hero, my parents playing golf, picture perfect. And what people often didn't realize, it was a very conditional living, walking through a landmine. And, we had nice clothes, we did nice things, but if you feared, it was very conditional. And what fortunately for me became a creative point was when I became a pre-adolescent. It took me till I was an older adult to realize I was being normal. But a friend and I used to meet the boys at the quarry and, make out, and if they were really lucky, they got to second base. But this was this was a small town. It got back to my brothers. It got back to my parents. They never questioned anything. That started a cycle of me being physically abused and trying to force me into staying home and in my bedroom, and then physical abuse. To their credit, they did eventually get help and support. And what happened to me, and it's a long story, I won't go into it now, but I created a dualistic personality. And there was the good waspy Terry who, wore nice waspy clothes and pretended she was going to get engaged and please her mother and, be in plays. And then there was Silky Catterwall, who wore a little too much makeup and only liked to go out with guys that had their own cars. And we would say we were going to the movies, but then go in back roads with our friends and drink beer. And I'll make a long story short, but through my life, where we were two separate entities, we eventually merged and supported each other. And fortunately, we're living in a society now where we can be both.
Yeah.
But on the last note, there is still a lot of white princesses out there that look like they have these picture perfect lives, and trust me, they know better than to rock the boat. It's so.
I teach them every day.
Huh?
I teach them every day.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
used to have a little bit of an intellectual regret because earlier Evie was talking to me about a friend that we have in common who was we were kind of partners in arms in one of the poorest congressional districts in the country, which is the Bronx. And when I left the Bronx and started teaching at Middlebury, I had a lot of guilt that I had left these children, I had left the people that I needed to be working with. And I realized that I was teaching the same emotionally destitute young people at Middlebury College, just one had marijuana and the other one had a black card. And they were doing just as much harm to themselves, and it was the same work about love and perseverance, and this identity integration, right? Because really, we're all doing this very delicate dance for conditional or unconditional love. And we actually haven't understood how to unconditionally love ourselves, so we can't give that to anyone else, and so it's just a repeated cycle. Like, my dance career, y'all, is based on someone dropping me off at the wrong place in a carpool. My mother tried to send me to a piano lesson, and my best friend's mom was like late for work and was like, just stay here. And I'm like, that's where I had to be. But even that was a residue of guilt. My mother wanted me to play the piano because when her mother gave her 75 cents to go around the corner and take a piano lesson, she took it to the candy store instead. So I was like, wow. Right, she didn't actually come clean about that till her 70th birthday. Right, and so there are all of these things that we're always undoing the things that have been put on us, Thank you for sharing that.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's such a powerful story, and it reminds me like that when you asked about becoming, like it's a verb for our whole lives. Like it's not like you reach one age and you are yourself. And I think when I was younger, I definitely used to think that. I remember like when I was in ninth grade, a friend's mom talked about, oh, you're all in discovery mode, and it was like, okay, well maybe when the time you're 28, which seemed really, really old then when you're 15, like then you finally discovered who you are and that's who you are. And instead, it's like our whole lives, this journey of becoming. And I think that like wrestling with two selves or more than that, that's something that I struggle with a lot still.
I was gonna say, like, it's one of those things I once read, this was years ago, and it was specifically about Black women, and I think it happens with a lot of people, where it talked about, like, you're driving stick shift, and you are one person in the boardroom, you are another person to your partner, you are another person, like, let me walk into my mother-in-law's house or be at a family gathering, I am another person. I'm another person who becomes 12 around my family. I'm another person who's like kikiing on the phone, and if our phone conversations were to be taped, our humanity card would just be yanked, from what we say and how we talk. And like that person, I really like that person, that really sassy, funny, dark, humorous person who keeps the shenanigans list, which I really do. I like that person. I try to bring her along everywhere because she feels most true. So I really did. I want to just acknowledge you. Like, I love that, and like how to bring all of those, and also unapologetically, the seductress that my mother is, whatever she was trying to do in the world, and there's value in that too, and I'm not sorry for that either. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. So first I want to ask, are you guys familiar with Chloe Valdary? Are you that woman?
No.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Recommend checking her out. She's a really interesting thinker. But I did want to dig a little deeper on what you were asking, because I feel like part of becoming, right, is that I've learned that I used to be actually afraid of any uncomfortable situation, and now it's like I'm looking for, I want people to have those uncomfortable conversations with me, right? But I think something that's interesting that's happening, right, is in trying to stay open and what you were talking about with like how it's so comfortable for the younger generations. I think sometimes the challenge that I even come across with, right? Because I identify as bi, and I come into the space now, and I'm like, oh, maybe bi is like offending somebody,
Yeah.
and like, is that like? But I don't identify otherwise, so you know what I mean? And like, and the same thing with woman, like defining a woman, right? It has become a controversy. I love a controversy. I'm curious what you guys think about this.
I'm gonna try to make sure. Thank you. Are you asking how we're thinking about how society is reflecting back and defining and redefining terms?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if that's what, how you want to talk about it, absolutely. Like, I feel like it's on the table. Like, it's like,
So on
how
the
do we
table.
talk about it, right?
Everything's on the table, even right down to redefining how we are in relationship. Monogamy, questioning monogamy.
Right.
Which it should have always been questioned, but question.
Nobody can afford that.
No,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be flippant.
I want you to be flip.
The thing is that we're really talking about power, and language is power.
Oh, yeah.
And when you have a generation that is lonely,
Mhm.
right, what they need is to do is feel powerful. So if they can reclaim the terminology, then they can rewrite the rules, and if the rules become more comfortable to keep them safe in their own fluid modernity, then that's where we are.
Right.
Right? It became, I mean, we've done this several times. It's a little bit personal to me, right, in a different way, because I come from a family of activists. Both of my parents are deceased. My father lost both his legs in Vietnam. My mother was a burgeoning socialite who became a politician without a college degree. So she's like working the system and navigating language is how I grew up, right? So we can go from like even the genealogy of the N-word in our country, like comes from Negus, which means, in Mandinka language means a king.
Oh, wow.
Right, so we're moving through language. Like, I remember when my mother told people to stop calling her African American, call me black. Like, but there's a delineation of power in the word, not necessarily how we identify. Right?
But also reality, when you say, right, like you're building, you're like create, I always like to say also that language creates and breaks reality. Like you're creating whole worlds in that, and there's a part of me like thinking that there's a way that the generation also, which they're not new, they're not doing anything new. I want them to know that.
Let them,
Well, glad that they're
let them
doing
have it.
I want them to have that. But I feel like it's a calling to the carpet moment, which there have been many of those moments where it's almost like a forced pause. Again, personally, I have a lot of different thoughts about this moment that I'm still like working through.
And this question of reclaiming, like I think that was on one of your slides, is it reclamation or
Yeah.
is it, and like the word queer is one of those too, that used to be, you know, the worst slur, and now it's like the emblem of, you know, an entire community. And, you know, so I'm bisexual and I've read a lot, done so much reading because I'm always like, I need to research this. Is it okay? Does it mean if you say that you're bi that you only reinforce the binary?
Right.
Right?
That's what I'm like.
Right? So
But
then you have to
like,
use.
if I don't use it, I feel like I'm being a fraud. So
Well, then, so there's a new word. There's pansexual. So
I
there's
know, but
people.
Right, but that could mean you might love a tree,
Right.
according to my
And
seventh
omni
grader.
too, but there's omnisexual as well. There's so many choices.
There's so many, and I think you are gonna. There will be people who are offended, like, oh,
Yeah.
does bi mean you wouldn't date a trans person? Well, that's not what it would mean for
honestly,
me.
I don't know.
No.
But also, I think, you know what, at the end of the day, and maybe that is on a banned phrase list. I think there's several banned phrases, whatever.
No, it's not.
Is it? Oh, it's not?
It's
Yeah.
still-
It's the still thing? I think at the end of the day, you know what, you're not going, if you are trying to not offend anybody, good luck with that.
Yeah, right. That's,
You're not like,
yeah.
it happens, Be ready to have the difficult conversation.
Yeah.
If somebody needs to say, hey, I was offended, or let's unpack this together. The other thing is sometimes, like, I always say, I'm not a moving company. I don't want to unpack all my boxes. But we can try to figure out our way around something if I've done or said something or moved in a way, and then we can figure that out. But I think that you, for yourself, how does it feel for yourself
Exactly.
is the ultimate question. And I know we're over time, and I think, yeah, I want to,
Yeah, I mean, are there any other last questions or
Yeah,
thoughts
or-
from all of you?
yeah.
You've been such a lovely audience.
and both of the books that are available are at Everyone's Book, so feel free to purchase. But Star, do you want to have the last?
I just want to say thank you to you three. It was
Thank
wonderful. It was inspiring. It made me think about so many things. And thank you again to all of you who came. I'm so
Thank you
grateful
for
to you.
joining us.